Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining and welcome to today's call on the recent escalations in Israel. May 2021 Escalations, the Socio-Economic and Shared Society Insights. My name is Liron Shoham. I am director of the Interagency Task Force on Israeli Arab Issues, an educational organization created to support North American Jewish leadership and communities with dedicated learning opportunities about Arab citizens and Jewish-Arab relations within Israel. On May 10th, a series of clashes that had been developing localized in East Jerusalem over evictions in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, use of the Damascus Gate during Ramadan, and police activity at the Temple Mount or Al-Aqsa Mosque escalated and spiraled into a national and regional conflict, including some of the worst inter-ethnic violence between Jewish and Arab citizens since October 2000. By some perspectives, it may even be worse than October 2000, particularly because violent riots and fighting in the streets often took place among citizens, causing significant damage and injury, even if by numbers, it was a minority of the population, Arab and Jewish. While most of the violence has ebbed, tensions remain high and many questions remain. Why did violence erupt within Israel? Why were mixed cities at the center of activity? And what is the impact on Israel's social fabric? This webinar is the second discussion we're holding on this issue. The first was to hear from Jewish and Arab civil society leaders from mixed cities, where most of the clashes took place, to begin to unpack the impact as well as the underlying reasons. Today, with a little bit more space between us and the events, although not that much space yet, we have an opportunity to look at the socioeconomic underpinnings and the implications from a shared society perspective. We are very fortunate to be joined today by Meirav Arlosoroff, senior commentator and opinions editor at the Israeli business newspaper, The Marker, and Mohammad Darawshe, director of the Center for Equality and Shared Society at Givat Haviva, the veteran long shared society organization. A little background and housekeeping before we begin. This will be held mostly as a moderator-led discussion. My first questions to Meirav and Mohammad will be open-ended to set the stage. Please feel free to begin plugging in questions in the Q&A as we go. We will incorporate where we can and leave time for audience questions at the end. My colleague here on the screen, Ilan Fathi Amit, is the Task Force Israel representative. He's on with us and will be responding to Q&A in writing in an effort to address more questions than we have time in person. And will also help me filter out the questions to bring to the stage. Finally, a word of background before we jump in. As most of you probably know, Arab citizens of Israel make up nearly 21% of the population, roughly 1.9 million people. Most live in Israel's northern and southern peripheries, but a growing number, today an estimated 11%, live in mixed cities, Lod, Akko, Ramle, Haifa, and the newly mixed cities, Carmiel, Beersheba, and more. There's a lot more to say, but I will leave it to our guest speakers. So on this note, with no further ado, I'll start with a question to Meirav. Meirav, 2 days after riots and clashes began, as border police units were being called to Lod, Ramle, and other mixed cities, you wrote an urgent column in The Marker asking that before Israel degenerates into another October 2000, meaning a violent crackdown by police, that we stop and think. What did you want to call attention to in the heat of the moment? What were you hoping to avoid? And what seeds did you want to plant in the public discourse for the days ahead?
Well, thank you, Liron, and hello, everyone. When I wrote that, it was in the beginning of the riots. Looking backwards, it looks a little bit odd because the riots eventually escalated to be probably much worse than the October 2000. You mentioned that it was clashes between citizens, Arabs hitting and even killing Jewish civilians and Jews doing just the same to Arabs. At that moment, I tried to prevent that from two perspectives. One was the police reaction. What happened in the 2000 riots was clashes between Arab citizens and policemen. The police opened fire on Arab demonstrators, and it ended up with 13 people killed, 12 Palestinians or 12 Israeli Arabs, and one Jew. And eventually, this was led to an inquiry, a national inquiry commission, the highest inquiry board that we have in Israel. That was the OR committee. And the OR committee gave a report. I think it's one of the best reports ever written in Israel by inquiry committees. And the first chapter of its report was about what caused the riots, what was the underlying reasons for it. And it's a full chapter talking about the social economical gap between Jews and Arabs within Israel, and about how frustrated and how discriminated Arabs are. And the OR committee kept saying this was riots, this was violent riots. It erupted during a wartime, which was the same in this case. I mean, it was the Intifada, the beginning of the second Intifada, which was a real war. It lasted for 3 years between Israel and the Palestinians. And while Israel felt being attacked by Palestinians, there it goes, Israeli Arabs joined the mutiny. They are betrayals. That's how the police looked at it, and that's why it opened fire. And what the OR committee tried to say was, no, this was not mutiny. These were not people betraying their country. These were citizens, discriminated ones, poor ones, feel very badly about the country, feel very badly about the national conflict they are dragged into, but they are not people trying to betray the country. Remember, they are citizens on the other side of the street. That's what I tried to say at that moment. Don't look them as enemies. Look them as citizens, maybe problematic citizens, violent ones, but not enemies. And I have to say, from that very narrow perspective, the police force was doing quite fine. I mean, the police force did learn the OR report, and there was almost no open fire. There's one incident of open fire by police force with one casualty. It's being investigated now, but taking in consideration the vast number of riots and the fact that it was held within the cities and with Jews and Arabs killing one another, the police was very calm. The police was trying to be quite objective, was trying to stand in the middle. Instead of clash between police and Arabs, it was the police trying to take a gap, or to try to take the Jews and the Arabs separate from one another. That was the main purpose. That was how they reacted. So the police perspective, I think the lessons were made, and police reacted quite well. What was much worse in this case was the fact that it was hatred between Arabs and Jews that erupted, and you can really feel that the first time since 2000, first time maybe even more than that, you could feel that the coexistence we all wanted to believe is there. The coexistence is very fragile, and it's not, and it's based on very fragile basis. Although I have to add right now, looking backwards, and also the General Security Service said that, by the way, 85% of the people that crashed the riots, both from first of all from the Arab side, also from the Jewish side, mostly from the Arab side, 85% were young criminals. We have a serious problem of crime inside the Arab society. We know that for at least 5 years. Not much was being done about it. As long as Arabs was killing one another, let's face it, the police didn't much care about it. So Arab society is being attacked by its own citizens for the last 5 years. There's a lot of illegal weapons, a lot of gangs. Entire cities are being sieged by its own citizens. And these are the same people that, instead of shooting other Arabs, now came out and started shooting Jews. So the vast majority, or the middle class, or I would say the non-criminal Arabs, stayed at home. The same goes for Jews. So it was mostly clashes by dropouts, by people with very deep social problems. And so the hatred was really mixed, or was really integrated into these two groups. And yet there was a time, a week or 2 weeks ago, that we felt that Israel might melt down, that the coexistence might not exist anymore.
I wonder, Mohammad, if you want to respond directly to the perspective of about policing before we get into many of the layers of socioeconomic causes and the framing about the correlation to crime. Do you want to start? I'm going to change up our plan. Do you want to start by respond to some of what Meirav had said about the police and attitudes within media discourse versus what the discussion's like in Arab society?
Sure. Thank you very much, Liron. I tend to agree with most of what Meirav said regarding, from the analytical point of view. Sorry, I'm a bit under the weather, so I have a little bit of a cough. But I'm not sure the police did learn the lesson, because from the perspective of the public, the Jewish public and the Arab public, the event ended. The violence stopped, it ceased, but the police continues with their campaign to arrest people. They've already arrested more than 1,800 people. Almost 100 new young people get arrested every day. And actually, most of those being arrested post-event are not the criminals that Meirav spoke about. There's a sense of a punishment that is happening by the police. You see it with arrests, but you also see police cars in heavy existence in the Arab towns and villages issuing tickets right and left. You cannot escape getting a ticket today if you are stopped by the police, no matter what, just the fact that you had an encounter with the police. So collective punishment continues. So I'm not sure how much they learned from the October 2000. I agree with Meirav that they learned not to use live ammunition. That is definitely a big step forward. It did save the lives of at least 12 people in comparison to last time. And it probably prevented the need for another commission to investigate police brutality. I mean, it wasn't lethal brutality, but there was enough force that I would say was not needed, that was used. It was mostly used to deter people from participating in demonstrations, and not necessarily to stop the violent aspects of the demonstrations. I've seen in more than one event, there were incidents that actually they wouldn't have happened unless the police, if the police have chosen not to be there. I'm speaking about my own village, Ixal. We were in a demonstration. I was one of the people in the demonstration. We went home at around 11 p.m. and because it was summer, usually that's the time that you do those type of events, and it was Ramadan, so you do it after you break fast. And at 11:30, the police came and started confrontations with about 10 kids that were still in the area. I mean, why is the police needed? The 10 kids that were there, they were not they didn't present any danger, not to Jews definitely, because there were no Jews in the area, not to the police because we do not have police at that time of the day or that time of the night, and they did not present any danger to the local community. And they simply came to sort of show who's in control, who's in power, and it ended up with 5 people arrested that night, which led for another demonstration. It fed the demonstration the following day, and the following day, and the following day. So we had 5-6 nights of demonstrations, which ended up with about 15 people arrested, when we didn't need to have a single one of them. If the police would have waited maybe 1 more hour, people would have been hungry enough and wanted to go home and go to sleep. So there were a lot of incidents and events that where the police actually chose to confront the people. Yes, their argument was they wanted to show determined. They wanted to confront them at the early stage, but I think that many of those kind of incidents could have been prevented at all. In many other areas, the police and the Jewish thugs that came from settlements, they were in the same line of throwing stones at the Arab demonstrators. So they were taking side. They were not in between. They were not trying to stop people. They were on one side of the Jewish demonstrators throwing stones at Arab demonstrators. Look at the pictures very well in Lod, and that created much of the anger, or escalated much of the anger among the Arab community in Lod, because they saw the police as part of the violence of the right-wing demonstrators on the other side. But overall, I do agree with Meirav that lessons were learned. I wonder if there will be new reports written about the All Commission report today, if we will rewrite it. I think that some chapters could have been dropped today about using lethal weapon, but not about the issue of excessive use of force. There was other types of excessive use of force. The police forces took side that with the Jewish demonstrators against the Arab demonstrators, which was not a nice and good scene to be viewed. They did not stand in between. But I do think that overall life was saved, and this allows us to start recovery model much faster. We didn't have too many funerals. We didn't have too many homes to pay condolences to. There was no narrative of one killing following the other or escalation going on. I mean, the events were happening at the same rate for over 10, 11 days, while in October 2000, the sense was it was escalating, that funerals turned into demonstrations and more people got killed into those demonstrations, and there was some kind of a buildup. In these events, there was no buildup. We started very high, we went up a little bit, and within 3 days later, I think we started dropping down in the events, which is not the same dynamics of the October 2000 events.
So I thank you for the interesting response and beginning to lay out so many of the layers of nuance in police minority relations. And I really appreciated that you started talking about the recovery. Before we go there, I want to open the framing up a little bit and look at mixed cities. We talked about Jewish vigilantes coming into the mixed cities. We talked about the high rates of crime. Let's start with Meirav. Can you speak a little bit about why, on one foot, why has crime become such an issue in Arab society, and what's it like in the mixed cities? And how does it affect Jewish-Arab relations there in a way that can help us understand why these were the communities where the violence erupted so intensely?
Did I answer, Mohammad? Okay, I'll start. Well, you have to first remember that Israel is a segregated country. We have what we call the 4 tribes: secular Jews, religious Jews, Orthodox Jews, and Arabs. And each one of the tribes living in different cities, studying in different education systems, completely different education systems, and many of them not even meeting at the workforce. The 2 of the tribes, the secular and the religious Jews, meet at least in the army. The 2 other tribes, the Orthodox and the Arabs, of course, don't serve in the army, so we don't even meet them there. We have some mixed workplaces, like the health system has a lot of Arab doctors and nurses. That's a very good example of coexistence, but in many cases, Jews and Arabs almost do not meet and almost do not interact, do not speak the same language. The Arabs education system, it's a national, it's a public system, and it's financed by the country, but it's a very poor education system, very badly managed. Most people that get out of that system speaks very few words in Hebrew, and the Hebrew is not good enough to be integrated into the workforce. They cannot work. They cannot go into the university because they don't have the proper education, and that causes, of course, and they come from very poor houses, so there's no father and mother that push them and educate them how education is important, and there's no role models. Arab cities, again, different cities, and they are quite poorly managed. It is improving, by the way, but many of the cities are poorly managed. There's not enough managerial experience within the Arab society. As I said, they're not mixed within the working force. There's not enough experience. They're not connected enough to the government. They don't know how to approach the government and get more budget. They don't know how to use the budget. In the last 5 years, the government decided to try and help Arabs by its decision 922, and they gave a lot of money into our municipalities, and unfortunately, a lot of it was finally ended up with the hands of the criminal organization. They saw the opportunities, a lot of money pouring into the municipalities, and they started blackmailing. And
if I can just jump in to say, you know, the money that went in from 922 most of it did not reach Arab communities in the mixed cities.
No, none of it.
Yeah.
Mixed cities did not get any of that money because they were not part, because the mixed cities are part of Jewish cities. They have a Jewish mayor, and this was meant to help Arab municipalities, so they did not get any of it. That's by the way one of the problems. But as I'm talking about the Arab society as a whole, 90% of Arabs lives in Arab cities, not mixed cities. The municipalities are very weak. The education system is very weak, and they don't have the budget and the power to get over the problem. That means they're very poor, very weak, and do not know how to help themselves. And the government, A, did not help them enough, and B, even when it tried to help, it did not know how to. The problems are very different from those of the Jewish municipalities. They had a lot of barriers to overcome, which you did not know how to overcome it. So the whole result of that was that our communities are very weak, very poor, and we have a major problem with Arab youth, male, not female. Female are not expected to work and support. So they have the opportunity to go and study in the universities. They also expect themselves more in high school, so they have better grades, and they manage to go into universities much more. Male, many of them drop out of high school, and even if they finish high school, they have very poor grades. They don't know any Hebrew, and so they are NEET. They are not employed, not in education, and not in training. 30% of Arab youth, again male, are supposed to be NEET. That's a huge amount. That's a problem not heard of in Israel, because Jews in Israel, when they're 18, all have a very clear vision what they're going to do. If they're auto-religious, they're going to the yeshiva, and if they're secular, they're going to the army. So they don't have to decide anything about their life until they're at least 21. By the time they're much more mature. No, Arab male get out of school when they're 18. They have nothing to do. They have no role model, and the only thing they're left to do is join the crime organization. So that's a major problem within the Arab society. In mixed cities, it was supposed to be better, because mixed cities are Jewish cities. They have more budget. They have more managerial power. They have better education system. It was supposed, and they have much more chances or much more opportunities because you live within a Jewish city. Just think about Jaffa. Jaffa is part of Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is a very rich city, and and you have many job opportunities and many education opportunities. It should have been, Jaffa was supposed to be blossoming. It was supposed to be the best Arab neighborhood in the whole country, and it's not. Why is it not? One of the reasons is social gaps. I mean, the gap between Arabs and Jews in the mixed cities are very big and you can feel it every day. Arab, as I said, because we're a segregated country, most Arabs live in their own cities. They don't interact with Jews. They don't feel the gaps on a daily basis. Within the mixed cities, it's there every day, and it causes a lot of frustration. Also, in some of the mixed cities, the mayors were elected, Jewish mayors elected by Jews. They don't count enough the neighborhoods. The Arab neighborhoods are very deteriorated. Government budget did not come in because these are Jewish municipalities. They did not get any budget from the 922 decision, and this all. And And also some of it is historical reason. Some of it is refugees from 1948 that never managed to advance themselves. In the Jaffa case, by the way, it's a gentrification that's going on very quickly in Jaffa. Jaffa, by the way, is an amazing gentrification case because you have, very, very weak, very poor Arabs living alongside the upper 1%. I mean, prices, real estate prices in Jaffa are one of the highest in the entire country. And people are living there since 1948. They cannot afford to stay there. They cannot afford to buy their own houses. They're all tenants, by the way. They're all what we call protected tenants. They cannot afford their own houses. They feel they're going to be cut, they're going to be kicked out from their own houses. And this has caused a lot of demonstrations, a lot of frustration, sorry. So all this together, and the fact, that there's clashes between Jews and Arabs within the mixed cities, all this really came to the explosion of what we saw in the last 2 weeks.
Thank you very much. And I want to now ask Mohammad to add to this. This is why do you see, how is the correlation of after a year of Corona, especially that young Arab men went to the streets after provocations that began not in the mixed cities, in East Jerusalem? How does this speak to their national perception, their sense of frustration, and the influence of the crime organizations?
Liron, I think we're talking about conditions which created the perfect storm. And it's not only economics, and it's not only the stories of Al-Aqsa or Jaffa Gate steps, or the rockets coming from Hamas, or poverty to that matter. I think it was a combination of events that we also need to add two factors to it. And the two factors come from the political life. Let's just remember that a month before, only 35% of the Arab voters voted for the Arab political parties. 65% said they are not representing our interests. So 55% did not vote at all. 10% voted for Jewish political parties, and only 35% voted for Arab political parties. This is, within a year, we lost almost 20% from top of the Arab voters, which is almost 1/3 of the Arab voters, voted with their feet within 1 year. They said to their political leadership, what you're delivering to us is not good enough. They're also saying to the state of Israel,
But we are hearing all the time about the cusp of a political breakthrough with
hopefully.
So how do you I want you to finish your point, but help us square this leadership level and public level.
At the same time, the lowest turnout rate in history also happened a month before the events that we had. By the way, if you make a correlation, you see that October 2000 events were right a few months after very high expectations from the political scene. We went to vote in May 17th, 1999, voted to Ehud Barak. 97% voted for Ehud Barak, expecting that a big revolution, political and social economic, is going to happen in the lives of Arab citizens. Very high expectations. The turnout rate at the time was 78% turnout rate. And the frustration from not meeting the expectations during the Barak government ended up with even boycott between Jewish and Arab between Jewish left leadership and the Arab political leadership, ending with the October 2000 clashes. Now, if we take the same time spectrum, a year ago, it was the highest modern turnout rate in the Arab community, accomplishing the highest ever representation, 15 seats for the joint list, resulting with an explosion of the joint list and dropping down to the lowest turnout rate, followed by clashes afterwards. It's the same.
By explosion of the joint list, you mean a split?
Yeah,
like dismantling.
Yes, it's not only the split; it's the split and a reduced turnout rate that followed it, and that's why it's not just one aspect. But basically, the similar scene is that a year before you have very high expectations of the voters, expecting that they're going to get into full integration, full power sharing. During the Barak's period, people were thinking about the possibility of having ministerial positions. A year ago, when people voted for the joint list, Ayman Odi promised that we're going to be part of that. We're going to appoint the next prime minister in Israel. We're going to decide X, Y, Z in Israel's history, and that wasn't met. They came out with zero results at the time, which was followed with reduced turnout rate and the escalation, the violence escalation. But again, back to October 2000. In October 2000, there was the events. 4 months later, the elections in February 2001, the elections to prime minister, the turnout rate dropped to 12%. Only 12% of Arab voters also participated in those elections, mostly the Druze population that brought that number up, and they constitute about 9% of the voters, but the massive majority of the Arab community did not vote. So this is not completely detached from the political scene. There is frustration from political participation, feeling that every time there's an attempt to move forward, the bar is increased higher, or the rejection is represented, mostly represented by, unfortunately, the center left, which is maybe this week is learning the lesson and is changing its strategy. I mean, as we talk right now, Mansour Abbas is meeting with the representatives of Yesh Atid, and it might end up being part of the coalition, not part of the government, but part of the coalition, meaning not getting ministerial positions, but become part of a safety net for a future center-left government. So I think most of the reasons for getting out are a combination. One, of all the economic factors that Meirav spoke about, there are enough reasons to say the writing was on the wall for a social economic revolt of the Arab community. 47% of Arab citizens are below poverty line, living in one of the richest countries in the world. There's no lack of money in Israel. There's well-designed distribution system that makes the Arab citizens poor. It's a structured, well-designed system. Maybe it's not only the responsibility of the current government, but it's an accumulation of policies that are creating 47% poverty rate in the Arab community. And those that believed in what I call economic peace, and this has been the theory since the creation of the Authority for Economic Development of the Minority Sector in 2006, the concept was, okay, we'll give them jobs, we'll incorporate them into universities. It's what's called the superordinate goal theory, which is mutual interests. Let's create enough interests of the Arab citizens in economic integration. In the parallel track, we'll give them political oppression, such as the nation-state law, which says which gives to the Arab citizens sort of a limit to their Israelization. They cannot engage in the same civic or national identity building as the rest of the Jews. So from one end, the state was believing in the economic growth of the Arab community and political oppression of the Arab community. This balance broke. Whoever thought this theory could work clearly got slapped in the face today. Whoever thought that you can only work on one track and create successes in islands, in certain islands, such as the medical industry, as Meirav mentioned, such as in universities, we have 19% of the university students are Arab. It's happening also in the high-tech industry. It's happening in maybe smaller other islands. It's great stories of success if you look at them individually, but they are not creating enough magnitude to create a tectonic shift to balance out the political retreat that the Arab citizens are feeling marginalized politically, feeling incapable through the Arab leadership to break through. And as a result, they're not voting not to Jewish political parties and not to Arab political parties. All of this is basically confiscating leadership from the top level to the street. Much of that leadership is going and being channeled to crime and to gangs that are filling the void. They are showing presence in the street and they're filling the void. Yes, we know that in the massive majority of, not the demonstrators, we have to make a correction here. It was not 85% of the demonstrators that were criminals. It was 85% of the violent demonstrators that were criminals. And we need to make clear distinction in this matter. It's 85% of those, the 1,550 people that were arrested, they had criminal records before. But we're talking about tens of thousands of people that demonstrated. Those were not criminals. So we should not just put it on the shoulders of the 85% of the 1,550 people that got arrested and got caught by the police.
I want to add an ingredient to the perfect storm and the significant underpinnings that you both shared to this, which is that of fear. After these events right now, there's an intensification of in the public discourse of fear between the Jewish. This gave images and this gave a bunch of raw material for Jews and Arabs to say, you see, this is exactly what we've been afraid of. The Jewish vigilantes can come in and attack us undeterred. The Arab rioters, given the opportunity, they will attack their Jewish neighbors. You both laid out the impact of unemployment, the lack of frameworks, the under budgeting, the lack of culturally adapted policing, the political vacuum that has given power to the street. How do we take these ingredients at the wake of this event where the public's appetite and discourse has retreated, even if leadership is still moving forward? What do you see as the ingredients that most responsibly need to be addressed right away? This is the $10 billion question, but I want to ask it to you guys. Meirav, do you want to come in and do you want to respond to any of what Mohammad was saying before?
I think I might be naive here, okay? I'm not sure I'm correct, but I think there is a major difference in the reaction after the riots between 2000 and today. 20 years has passed and a lot of advancement was made. Now the Arab citizens have a middle class, a very strong middle class. We see them not only in restaurants as waitresses, but also as doctors. We see them as in pharmacists. We see them much more in working places, not enough, but much more. And also we see them in politics more. You know, Mohammad mentioned the joint party, which had 15 members in parliament. Now it has, let's say the two of them has 10, the two parties, the split two parties. But it's now the first time ever that the parties talk to the Arab parties and ask them to join into the coalition. That's a major breakthrough. And I think, you know, that's part of that evolution that has been going on for the last 20 years. Decision 922 was also a major breakthrough. We used to avoid the Arab citizen. We used to not look at them. Yeah, they live in different cities. They work in different places. They don't study with us. So it's if they don't exist. That was the situation in the year 2000. And that's why after the riots in 2000, there was a few years of boycott. Jews did not go into Arab villages for a few years. And, you know, some economists said it took 15 years for that gap, or that crisis to recover. I don't think it will happen now. I think now we're much more integrated. And that's maybe also part of the reason why it clashed so strongly, because Jews and Arabs also live together much closer nowadays. And they work together and they meet more. That causes a lot of clashes if it's within mixed cities that you have extremists for both sides. But that also causes a lot of closeness and more people know each other much better. And one of the action I saw was advertisement, commercials by public, all kind of companies, putting on the two workers, one Jew and one Arab talking about them working together and how it is important for them to work together. And this is companies with only profit to care about. What do they care about? Social gaps in Israel? No, they do care, because they do feel this is something that is dangerous for all of us, also from the financial point of view. So it's too soon to say, because it just happened 2 weeks ago. But I think there's a much better chance of recovery, and a much better chance of working together on solving the problems. And and that should be the attitude. That it should be, there's a lot of gaps, social gaps. There's also a national gap. You cannot avoid that. Okay, there is a national gap. Jews and Arabs don't see the state of Israel in the same eye. Jews want it to be a Jewish democratic state, and while Arabs prefer it, like the United States of America, to be what we call the all-citizen democracy, with no mention of religion in our democracy. But that will not happen, because Israel will remain a Jewish democracy, and a Jewish democracy that should know how to integrate its non-Jewish citizens. And I think there is a chance, and also something in the professional level of the government realized that we don't have a future. We don't have a economical future. We don't have a growth future unless we integrate the Arabs. So I think that as hard as it is, and as much as fear controls the street, I truly believe, I hope, and I hope I'm not wrong here, I truly believe that the response will be, let's get out to work, let's try and rebuild our society and our coexistence.
I want to segue this to something that Mohammad raised before, and I think the example that you gave of the private sector is a really powerful one. We heard a lot of indications of companies that issued statements, came out and didn't just issue public statements, but also issued statements to their own workforce of solidarity, showing a real development in the discourse and capacities of diversity and inclusion in the private sector. And I think it's not a coincidence, because for 10 years, the private sector was the arena of most concerted efforts to increase employment, increase capacities for inclusion and integration. And it's really nice to, in a sense, in a time of crisis, it's nice to see that yielded results. And I guess I would segue that, I would open that question and say, what is the status of this kind of integration on the political front if, on the one hand, you're in a cusp with leadership, but on abyss with public sense of optimism about this? And can this be replicated? And is there a basis? Is there same government will to replicate the kind of work that had been done economically on the social front?
Well, I think we are, I agree with Meirav's analysis, but I think it's only taking the economic aspect and not taking the educational and the political aspects into a perspective also. I think that the business community is taking a leadership role, completely unexpected, a role that was not taken in after October 2000, and as a result, delaying the rebouncing and the healing process. I think the best recommendation for reading materials is the book of Professor Sami Samouha, which was published in October 2010. And he titled it The Lost Decade in Jewish-Arab Relations, which is that concept of boycotting, mutual anger, mutual frustration of the Jews against the Arab citizens and the Arab citizens against the Jews, that feel the sense of failure of the project of integration and citizenship. It lasted for almost a decade, and as I said, Professor Sami Samouha captured it in that book. So I think that the fact that the business community is taking role, and let me share with you a story. In March or April 2001, I called on Ronnie Naftali. He's one of the owners of one of the big water companies at the time called May Eden, and we were holding an event at Givat Haviva, something called Children's March for Peace. 5,000 kids, 2,500 Arab, 2,500 Jewish. They marched at Ya'ar Labi near in the north, in a forest, and I asked him for 5,000 bottles of water, and he said fine. Then I asked him for his logo, to put on the big signs on at the final event where they had to put a big party. He said, please don't do that. I do not want to have any recognition. This could harm my business. If my company is seen as funding a children's march for peace inside Israel, this is bad for business. Now compare that story with more than 70 people signing this document of companies calling to end the fighting and start Jewish-Arab partnership during the events on Thursday, during the events in Globes, the following day in Haaretz and in Yediot Ahronot. This is continuing with huge signs of Harel Insurance Company. They're putting signs in Nazareth and in the heart of Tel Aviv in Arabic and Hebrew, saying the best insurance for shared society is coexistence. I wouldn't have expected this. I think the business community is responding with a great deal of maturity that has been accumulated in the last decade or 15 years. The second good response, I think, is the civil society organizations. We know what needs to be done today. We were in a shock after October 2000. Remember that about 180 some organizations existed in October 2000 that worked for Jewish-Arab coexistence. Few months later, it was only 30 that survived the conflict, mostly as a result of internal tension between the different, between inside the organizations themselves, or complete disbelief of the donors in this strategy. And the industry, let's call it, of shared society melted for a number of years. Very few survived. But then I will come to the government. Unfortunately, Meirav, I don't see government today. The government is not acting in any kind of strategic action.
Mohammad, I talk to the people working inside the government.
Well, bureaucrats are good. I love the bureaucrats.
To do things.
I love the bureaucrats in Israel. Without them, this country would have melted many years before. They are the ones that are keeping something functioning and operational. And I think they are the true partners that we need to focus with or work with. I think that as a policy, Israel still does not have a policy for shared society, not have a policy for cohesive inclusion of the Arab citizens. So they do a little bit with the police, they do a little bit with the business community. 922 was more than a little bit, was significant. Not all of the money was spent at all for many reasons, but there's no cohesive aspect of to deal with the big questions that even Meirav started with, such as education. The state controller issued on the 18th of this month a report, and I think the timing was phenomenal because he issued it in the middle of the heart of the events. He said that only 0.4%, less than 0.5%, of Israeli students engage in educational programs that promote shared society. Less than 0.5%. When there were directives to the Ministry of Education, to the government, there were directives of what needs to be done. Just to give you a comparison between Israel and other countries, Israel has a budget line of 2 million shekels, $650,000 or so, $600,000 for education for shared society. Northern Ireland, with 1/5 of the population, has a budget for education for shared society, which is 160 million euros. Now, if you do the numbers, it's like 1 to 200 or something like that. It's an incredible gap. The government does not invest mainly in the social issues. They invest in where they see economic returns, which is good, and I'm not asking them to stop. I think they should continue with 922, complete it by the end of the year, finish 923, and try to get something as a follow-up with something more significant, focusing on the community or on the groups that were missed out, such as the mixed cities, or where there you have a bigger potential of developing a middle class, an Arab middle class, which seems to be the multiplying factor. Because if you only feed the poor, that's not enough. You need to create engines that inside the Arab community that can create businesses inside the Arab community, because those 41% that do not speak Hebrew and are afraid of riding a bus and going to a Jewish town, especially in days like this, they are looking for jobs inside the community. and not just getting skills to be able to work in the Jewish labor force. I'm not saying that we need to develop a parallel economy, but we need a functional economy in the Arab community that can offer more jobs than what it offers today. The Arab economy today offers only 8% of the jobs in Israel, while we're talking about 21% of the population. Only 8% of the jobs are produced internally, and that's the reason for a very high unemployment rate. Yesterday, 2 days ago, I'm not sure if it was Meirav that published it, the highest rate of unemployment is in the city of Nazareth. It's 25% unemployment, reported unemployment. If we count unreported employment, it probably could be double than that.
This is also following a year of COVID, which hit Arab society very, very hard. And Meirav, there are questions. You weren't heard so clearly when you spoke about what you speaking with bureaucrats. I think that people would be really interested in hearing when you reach out and try to see what the government is planning and working to do, what kind of commitment, what's the discourse is within the government about trying to close these gaps. And if anyone, you're approaching them economically, I think the question of what's happening within the government about shared society is a slightly different question. And I want to throw in there Alan Divak's question about President Rivlin and his influence on the shared society discourse in Israel over this time. Two different things, if you can both speak to it. But Meirav, start and make an
Well, there's no government yet. And we've been 3 years without a government. That's a major crisis as it is. And it's obviously also damaged a lot the effort to advance the Arab society and to narrow the gaps. Now, bureaucrats are part of their own nation. Some of them got scared. Some of them said, why do we invest that money? Look at what we got in return, riots, and it looks like we are going through a civil war. Most of them don't. Most of them realize that this was mostly a social, economical riots, that we have to advance more, that it's too soon to say that we spent our money not wisely. 922, by the way, only a small portion of that money went into action. Something like 1/3 of the budget was implemented because of all kinds of structural problems within the government and within the local municipalities. This should overcome. And I think everyone is now looking up to 923 new plan to reinvest within the Arab society. I think the government was not intimidated. Some of it was, but part of it was not intimidated. And they are looking forward to work. But, we are hoping we'll have a government today, and maybe that will be the best, the best outcome we can have. If we have a government, I think, yes, we'll have a new plan. And I think also with Abbas, by the way, being part of the coalition.
Mansour Abbas.
Okay, I think that most people have goodwill. Most people want to invest both time and money to do better.
Really quickly, tell us what you can tell us about the impact of the pandemic, of a year of crisis and being shut down. How did that contribute to the economic gaps and to the sense of frustration and to the explosion right now?
Look, Israel, although Israel now looks very good because we're all being vaccinated, prior to the vaccination, we looked terrible. I mean, Israel turned out to be, I think, one of the worst managed among the developed countries. All the managerial problems we have, all melted down during the COVID. The two major ones was the Haredi autonomy and also the Arab autonomy or the Arab segregation, the fact that we don't have control and we don't have enough power and we don't have enough communication between Jews and Arabs. So, the alienation, the fact that the feeling that we are different tribes was very strong there, even before the riots. And, when it came to the political problems and it came with the Hamas attack, altogether, yes, it did not contribute to the feeling of coexistence, but we should overcome it.
Mohammad, I'm going to throw a big one to you as we have 5 minutes left. Help us understand some of the things that emerged from these riots is a resurfacing of of a sense of the national discourse in Arab society. Sheikh Jarrah, the West Bank, Gaza, Arab citizens of Israel. There was a real sense of this is a shared, that part of the identity. It's not just about closing gaps for Arab citizens, trying to sense only just equality. That's a big part of the discourse. But another one was a shared sense of injustice. Can you help us understand how come right now the national discourse was the unifying factor and played such a big part of the eruption of frustrations?
Well, you need to understand that the Arab community is very well engaged with East Jerusalem community. I mean, since 1967, East Jerusalem is getting closer and closer to the Arab citizens, and the Arab citizens are getting closer and closer there. Many of the Arab elite, many leadership, political leadership, studied at Hebrew University, lived in East Jerusalem. They know Sheikh Jarrah because they were hanging out there. They know the steps of
Damascus
Gate, because that's where they used to eat watermelon during the month of Ramadan, or watch the soccer games during the Mondial. Most of the biggest chunk of the Arab elite are graduates of Hebrew University. They know the scene. They live it. Many are even married in East Jerusalem, including myself. My wife is from East Jerusalem, from the village of Essaouira. So the link between East Jerusalem and the Arab citizens has become very, very strong. I would dare say it's beginning to compete between the connection between East Jerusalemites and the rest of the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. So there has been some kind of an Arab Israelization of East Jerusalem, but also part of the Palestinization, East Jerusalem Palestinization of the Arab citizens in Israel. Many see themselves as the defenders of the East Jerusalemites who do not have a citizenship, and they are sort of caught in between in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They have no address. The Palestinian Authority does not have any authority in East Jerusalem. So many people in the Arab leadership see that they have a role to play when it comes to trying to confiscate and evict people from Sheikh Jarrah or Essaouira or other places. That's one factor. The second factor is religious. What flared the events was that morning two things that are all related to Al-Aqsa Mosque. One was the limiting that number of people allowed to go pray in what's called Al-Jum'ah Al-Yatima, the last Friday of Ramadan, preventing the Arab citizens from driving on Saturday to what's called Laylat al-Qadr, the night of destiny, which is the holiest night in the Muslim calendar. That was immediately the day after, which was the Saturday. They stopped the buses in Abu Ghosh. People might have seen the pictures. That was a big religious insult. That was a very harsh insult for many people that are not even religious. I mean, it's people like me would go. I didn't go this year, but in previous years I did go. If we go just 2 years ago, the number of people that went to Laylat al-Qadr, to the night of destiny, was 350,000 people. This past event, it was only 85,000 that were allowed. You're talking about a huge mass of more than 200,000 people were not allowed, either because they were afraid of getting there, or they heard the news that the police is putting blockades. So the amount of anger was very high. And then the following day, which was Sunday, when it was Jerusalem Day, the Jews were celebrating Open Jerusalem, the Arab citizens and East Jerusalemites licking the wounds of not being able to access Jerusalem just the day before and the day before, which was Friday and Saturday. And then the Jews celebrate this access. And then the police goes into the mosque, Al-Aqsa Mosque, uses excessive force, 303 people injured within 2 hours. More than half of them are Israeli Arab citizens that practice something also relating to the last 10 days of Ramadan, which is called i'tikaf, where people stay in the mosque for almost 10 days. And 303 people were injured. Half of them were Arab citizens of Israel. So many people take it to the big capital P politics. I take it to the small P politics. It's the families of those 300 people that were immediately the ones to go out to the streets and say, you injured our kids today unjust. Why? Only to please the right wing in their celebration of Jerusalem Day. It was some kind of a revenge act of Benjamin Netanyahu and the Minister of Police, Ohana. They took a revenge act against the worshippers because they felt that maybe they felt that this is politically handy. This is easy for them to show force and maybe use it politically afterwards to create security event that will prevent an alternative government to emerge afterwards. So that, by the way, this scenario was written by many people weeks before, including Ehud Olmert, who said, wait, you'll see that this is going to happen. Netanyahu is going to play this role. So it's maybe conspiracy theory. I don't know. I don't want to focus on it too much. But when you add one piece after the other, I think it's not that much nationalism, but it's accumulation of events that reached a boiling moment. And that's why I'm actually a bit optimistic that we might get out of it quickly, because it wasn't huge nationalist identification or erasing the green line that took place into this process. In the contrary, I think that the Arab community is drawing the green line greener every single day. And you see an Israelization process happening every single day. You see the amount of people engaged in the recovery process by people putting their name parallel to the leaders of the business community, Arab business leaders putting their names also in the same weight, calling for calm and coexistence. So I think that, it's not, the events were huge. I can't say they were easy, but I think that the correction is much, much easier than the past if we work properly.
This is such I couldn't ask for a better note to end on, to give us hope. We're 3 minutes past time. Meirav, I'm going to assume you would say yes, and the investment in in closing economic gaps is exactly valuable for this reason. I mean, people, thank you so much for being on with us late. Meirav, if you want to have a last word, please do, and then we will close. I want to thank you both so much. I think we covered a lot of very complicated ground, and we could go on for another hour.
Yes, we can, and let's keep it optimistic. I think Jews and Arabs, we both have to share our lives together, whether we like it or not. And I think this is a conclusion most people in Israel agree upon. We are both citizens of this country. We have disagreements, but we have to keep trying, and eventually it will get better. It is better. The reaction now is much better than 20 years ago, and I think it will get better over the time, although it's not going to be an easy process.
And I will add, civil society organizations are acting with incredible professionalism now in how to kick back and engage. You can only hear the radio today, and tonight we're launching a social media campaign also that will be out there.
We will forward it along. Thank you both so much. I'm sure we will have opportunities to speak again. Thank you to everyone who joined us. We will be announcing additional calls on this very complex issue in the near future.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take it off.